Hi there. Welcome back to episode 4 of the Reel Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And we're here to talk about movies and our love thereof.
Specifically today, we're going to be talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League, which feels like it might be a little bit of a dangerous topic with all the discourse that's gone on online. But here we are.
Yeah, I have not mentioned anything on Twitter specifically about my opinions about Zack Snyder's movies or about Justice League in particular, just because a lot of the dialogue has become so toxic, and because I run the risk of association with some of those more unsavory elements of the fandom.
Yeah, and it's this interesting thing where at least my Twitter sphere is full of people posting comments that say, I will not be talking about Justice League. Please do not message me about it. There'll be no post about it. I assume this person will go watch it, but people are choosing silence rather than going on and exposing themselves to essentially disagreement of opinion leads to a lot of bad things. Specifically, there's a sect of this fan base which has been cyberbullying and harassing and whatnot, which is just really not cool.
And this is the problem, I think, with a lot of fan bases when they get to a certain size or certain, call it cultural saturation, maybe. Thinking also of Star Wars, I tend to stay away from Star Wars dialogue online now too, just because, and I think it's the case with the Zack Snyder fan base and the Star Wars fan base, where it's a very small percentage of the fans, but they're also very vocal and they're very toxic and they get into very kind of bullying behavior. And just for I just didn't want to be I didn't want to get dragged down in that kind of quagmire. I didn't want to be associated with these people unintentionally, and unfortunately, like, I've steered clear of Star Wars talk and Zack Snyder talk online now a lot of the time.
Yeah, and essentially the social media platforms kind of enable a lot of the negativity to happen.
Yeah.
And it's also the flip side that a lot of positivity can happen, because this is not the first time we've seen fans start a campaign to bring back like a season of or series of a television show or whatnot. There's been lots of famous examples of that, I think. But I think Zack Snyder's Justice League is probably the first most significant movie that had such a campaign launch with it. And I just wanted to point at one thing too, where the fan base, as toxic as it is, there's a lot of good people in it too, and raising awareness and fundraising, in this case for suicide prevention, which was just a really nice thing to have happen out of this.
Absolutely. I know we talked about the negatives of social media and the negatives of fandom, but this is the problem, that a small group of people kind of taint the larger fandom and taint the public perceptions of that fandom. But I think by and large, the DCEU fans, the DC Extended Universe movie fans, and the Zack Snyder fans and Star Wars fans, I think by and large they're good, decent people who just love this content and love these movies and love the TV shows. And I think that, like you said, a lot of good comes out of this too, where you see not just in terms of the Restore the Snyder Cut campaign, where they're raising money for suicide prevention and that kind of thing, but also in a creative sense, like helping to restore creative visions for these, we'll call them, it's not to be pretentious, but artists, right? And I think that was a big part of this too. There was obviously some people who didn't like the chopped up version of Justice League we got, but there were also people who genuinely felt for Zack Snyder, who, I don't know if we want to get into this now or later, but was kind of dealing with a personal tragedy at the time and left the production of Justice League back in, I think it was released in 2017, so I think in 2016 or 2015 when they were filming, and then they brought in Joss Whedon to finish off the movie. But as it turns out, watching the Snyder Cut, he basically just about reshot the entire movie. It was nuts.
Like, it's pretty fair to say, and like you said, maybe we should get into this later, but maybe just in the context right now, Snyder finished shooting the film, and I think ended up having to leave the project before a lot of the post-production happened. And so initial, like, rough cuts came in. They decided, no, we're going to bring in someone else to finish off the project because Snyder is out of the picture at this point. They chose Whedon, and he did all these infamous reshoots, obviously with the Henry Cavill's mustache and mustache gate or whatever you want to call it there. And of course, I mean, obviously changing the entire tone of the film from his original vision.
Right. So I think what happened was the kind of common story for us who obviously are not industry insiders or anything. This is just what we're able to piece together from what we see in the media and as the stories kind of unfolded. But essentially there was some blowback in terms of the reception for Batman v Superman. And some of the criticisms from critics and fans was that it was a little bit dark, not just visually, but in terms of tone. And then when Zack Snyder left and he had his kind of rough assembly cut there, and I think the studio executives, again motivated mostly it was obviously by money, but they were really thinking about how can we lighten this tone, how can we make this more profitable, and they looked at, of course, the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they turned to Joss Whedon, who helmed, of course, the first two Avengers flicks, Avengers and then Avengers Age of Ultron, which we know were hugely successful as he was making those films. The MCU was really coming into its own, and so they turned specifically to Joss Whedon. It's clear to see because of the success that he was able to help deliver on the Avengers films, and if you look at the type of filmmaking that Joss Whedon has and the kind of aesthetic, the filmmaking aesthetic that Zack Snyder has, very different in tone, very different visually, where Joss Whedon is very much about, I mean, people know now that when you say like it's the dialogue is very Joss Whedon, it's like everyone's a quip machine, throwing out those, clever one-liners, a lot of jokes, very lighthearted, and even the color palette visually with Joss Whedon is always like it's a lot brighter. Everything's lit a lot more. But what happened was, as Brian, you were saying, is that he came in and essentially reshot just about the entire movie, and with Henry Cavill, who was shooting a Mission Impossible movie at the time. I'm not sure which one it was, though.
Fallout.
You're the Mission Impossible expert here. Which his character in that movie had a mustache, and that was what, Paramount?
Yes.
And then this was Warner Brothers that was shooting Justice League. So when he came back for reshoots, I think Paramount actually reached out to Warner Brothers, and they actually apparently what I heard was they came to a deal where he would be allowed to shave it, but they'd have to pay them some money. Really? Because they would have to delay production as he grew back his mustache. So they actually did come back, and Warner Brothers was basically responded as like, "No way, man! It's like we're not paying you anything." And we saw the result was that in the original release, the 2017 Justice League, they literally CGI'd the mustache off of Henry Cavill's face. And I don't want to speak badly of the visual effects artists, because I know that they're usually under huge deadlines and they're overworked and underpaid. But I think because of that and because of the tight deadline, they weren't able to really do the CGI justice. And you could tell like Henry Cavill's, not just his upper lip, but sometimes his entire face looked entirely different and like kind of warped almost. It didn't look like the actor at all.
It was definitely a situation where the visual effects were poor, and like you said, not necessarily because of the artist's skill level, but it always comes down to how much time they're given to do the job. And doing something like that looked like it was a pretty involved process that they just did not have the time to do. And basically the special effects suffered for that.
It was one of those movies, I think the last time really felt like this was watching The Dark Knight Rises, where I thought about this movie for days afterwards. Like I felt something, it was like a seismic shift inside me. Something has shifted somewhere, right? I was watching this thing. It felt epic, like in the scale of like Lord of the Rings epic. Just the story and the scope, but without feeling bloated.
What's interesting, you mentioned Lord of the Rings, because like we saw Lord of the Rings in theaters, and then we bought the DVD of the extended cut, and I'm thinking back to, probably 2003 here, watching that extended cut for the first time. I couldn't tell you all the little differences. Like there's so many just little additions onto every scene in the extended cut, where Zack Snyder's Justice League, things play out very differently. There's a lot of new scenes here, which I guess aren't technically new. They're the original film scenes. They are not the refilmed scenes that we saw in the theatrical. It's pretty confusing, but it felt like there was a lot of different stuff going on here, to the point where I only vaguely remember the original theatrical cut and its plot points, and we still follow a lot of that, but we get multiple hours of new content in this movie.
Yeah, it really feels like, going back in time, if things had been different, if they'd like taken this movie and split it in two, they would have had an awesome 2-part Justice League movie in line with, I don't know if I put it on par with Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, but it would have been up there, because I think that there's a big fight with Steppenwolf in the tunnels under Gotham Harbor. I think that takes place at almost exactly the halfway point in the movie, so it would have been a perfect split to put this into 2 different movies, and they would have had double the money.
So I gotta ask, did you watch the entire 4 hours of this movie in one sitting, or did you see it in a few sittings?
So I felt like in order to get the full experience, I needed to watch it in one sitting.
Yep.
A couple bathroom breaks aside, but just to get, and I think that maybe helped add to the scope and scale of the thing, because when you see it all at once and you sit down for an afternoon, like I sat down with my son on a Saturday afternoon, and we just watched the heck out of this thing, and it just feels like you're immersed in this world, right? It feels like you're being brought in. It feels like it felt right. There was emotional commitments. There's emotional investments to the movie and to the characters, especially with all the added scenes and all the background for the characters.
So the characters were greatly expanded upon, and to great benefit to the audience. Ray Fisher's character, Cyborg.
Yes.
Completely different, like re-energized, so much more interesting, and I don't know if I want to call him the anchor of the film, but he had the most character development, the most everything happening, where it really took from the theatrical cut, just, being kind of angry, who had his powers and his changes forced upon him, into this more dynamic character that had this deep relationship with his mother, and now as a result of his father's experimentations, he lost his mother and holds a lot of anger towards that father. So there's a lot of motivation there that we didn't get before.
But like you were saying, there's an emotional core to this character now. There's an emotional arc that you follow, where he starts off in a very dark place. In the original, the 2017 cut, he's just a sad cyborg. He's just sad and angry. But in this one, it's like, no, you get to see his background, where you saw his physical peak, right? So having his body replaced with all these cybernetic parts, you get more sense of that kind of tragedy there, where he had so much of his identity wrapped up in his body and his physical abilities, right? To go through that trauma, to have that relationship with his parents fleshed out, where you see his mom really involved and his dad a little bit more distant, and that kind of tension there, and you see his sense of justice when he was hacking into the school system to improve his friends' grades. Essentially, he was willing to kind of sacrifice his own scholarships and his own place at the college to help out his friends. Yeah, and you see his mom going to bat for him, and so even a couple extra scenes with his mom, who didn't exist in the 2017 version. She was only in the Snyder cut. But you get that sense of loss when they get into that accident, and he loses the one parent that he felt really close to, who was out at all his football games, who made the time. But then to get that relationship with his dad, where his dad, you could tell he loved him, because he sacrificed. He went to one of the mother boxes, one of these alien artifacts, and used it to reconstruct his son's body with his cybernetic parts. Without necessarily considering the consequences psychologically to his son and the kind of trauma that he'd have to endure from that. Yeah. But he wasn't really emotionally connected to his son in a really concrete way until near the end of the film. But you could tell there was these hints that obviously he cared about his son, because he wanted to save him from death no matter what.
His father willing to make those sacrifices he knew like he's going to damage his son in this way.
But like you were saying, yeah, like Cyborg was fleshed out, and Ray Fisher was given a chance to shine. You could see a lot more of him being able to flex his acting chops. You got to see a lot more background. Flash, oh my God, Flash was another character who was like, he was actually given stuff to do in this movie. He was actually useful, and he wasn't just like a quip machine. He was obviously a bit more of comic relief, but his introduction scene now, when there's a big car crash and he goes to rescue, I think it's supposed to be Iris West.
It is, yep.
And the whole, like, I don't know, you could, like I said, I'm a huge fan of Zack Snyder, and the man loves his slow-mo.
Yeah. Well, it worked perfectly for the Flash, right?
It worked perfectly. So, but the whole setup where the whole scene's just frozen, and he's, grabbing the hot dog that's frozen in midair, and then he like gently lowers down the girl Iris West, and she's lying on the ground. He looks up, and she looks up at him, and he runs away, and he's back, and there's like nice little kind of ending to that scene where he's back in the pet shop where he was trying to get a job, and he's like, he had that wiener that he stole, or that he took from the crash, and he was like using it to feed all the dogs to like get that job. So it's like a nice little thing where he's like thinking ahead, where he's like all these little things in his life going on, and it's almost like showing like he's like how he's thinking in hyperspeed too, right? Because I was wondering, why is he taking that hot dog? Is he gonna eat that gross hot dog later? Right? But it's like, no, because he's thinking about the job that he went to interview for. So it's kind of neat, because he's always talking about how he's like at a faster pace than people, but even cognitively, like he's like,
basically Whedon in the theatrical cut really dumbed down the Flash, and not only as a character, like as a human being, making him that comic relief, but really reduced his powers to the point where the Flash doesn't even know how to use his own body, right? He fumbles around. He's he's getting into, like, he's running into walls. He falls on top of Wonder Woman at one point in the theatrical cut because he doesn't have control over his body.
Yeah.
And now we get a much more competent, but also human Flash. What's his name again?
Barry Allen?
Barry Allen.
Yeah. Or Ezra Miller.
I was just drawing a blank on the Billy Allen, Barry Allen here, Billy Allen.
But no, like in the Snyder cut, he's actually, I like there's a balance where he, a couple times, like he stumbles and falls because he's a kid and he's learning the ropes, but he's essential to the plan at the end of how they're going to beat the bad guy. And when that plan goes sideways, he's literally the guy who saves the day. Like Flash it was turned in the original 2017 release, the Justice League, he's reduced in that final fight to going and saving a single family in that truck.
He pushes a truck,
and now he literally saved the entire world.
And it was done very well, because the scene where they charge the mother box as it's falling into the bioliquid with Superman's body in it, or whatever happened there, it plays out very similarly. But there's this one little added touch where Barry is traveling along so fast, and you see the mother box, like it touches the liquid, and it's like, oh man, I think we might be too late. But I've seen the theatrical cut. I know he's not too late, but this is playing out differently. Well, he goes so fast, he starts reversing time. The mother box rises back up, and then he touches it. And I'm thinking, wow, that was pretty slick. And it pays off literally like an hour and a half later, where he's saving the entire thing. And obviously spoilers throughout all this stuff here.
Oh, yeah.
But basically, again, we see things are not going well. Things are about to fail.
Well, I love how, so what happens is, so the plot is kind of generally the same in terms of, so there's this bad guy, Steppenwolf. He comes down from outer space, and he's looking for these 3 artifacts called mother boxes, which when they're combined together, they create the Unity. And what that does is it's a creative / destructive force that can be used to, that Steppenwolf and his boss, Darkseid, used to conquer planets and recreate them in the image of, I think, Darkseid's home planet, which is this apocalyptic hellscape, like lava and kind of very, very hell-like. But essentially what happens is Steppenwolf eventually in the movie, both versions of the movie, but in the Snyder Cut, he gets the mother boxes, and they're in the process of combining to form that unity, which is essentially going to destroy our planet. And so Superman is resurrected at that point. He shows up at the end. He beats the living heck out of Steppenwolf, but it's too late because Cyborg's trying to separate the mother boxes, and he fails. And like even Superman coming back, and Superman fails, and the Flash is out there because he's running around in circles trying to build up speed, because again he's going to use his charge to help quote unquote push Cyborg kind of into the mother boxes to interface with them. But he gets shot at. He falls down. He's waiting for it. I think he gets hit in the leg, so he's waiting for because of his increased metabolism, he heals faster. So that wound in his leg heals, but not in time. And he starts off, and like you said, we had that hint earlier, just a hint that when he approaches the speed of light, that strange things start to happen with time. And you get that sense that he's actually tried to do this before, right? That he's tested out his powers, but at that end scene, he runs so fast that he starts reversing time, and it's just literally just a couple of moments. So he's not going back hours or days. It's literally just a couple of seconds, but that's all that's needed. And the visuals for that shot were so amazing. Where like the ground was actually reforming under his feet. As he was running, as he traveled back in time. Like you could see Superman and Cyborg literally reassembling from their skeletons outward as time went backwards, just those few couple seconds. But Flash gets in there and he manages to touch Cyborg and give him that charge or that push he needs to get into the mother box and save the day. But literally, Flash is the one who's able to, like, all of them working together. But now Flash has this huge part where he is instrumental in saving the day. Such a change from the 2017 version where he has nothing to do, and this one he's literally he helps save the planet. They would have lost without him. Like it's incredible what they did. Like
every member was important in that final battle. And in the theatrical cut, the Flash really wasn't that important.
He wasn't involved in the battle at all. He was literally they told him to go out and save people, and he saved one family. And like in that final fight in the original release, the theatrical release, Superman shows up and he starts to fight Steppenwolf, but then he like leaves to go save a bunch of civilians. But like literally the entire planet's fate is at stake. It doesn't make any sense why he would leave that fight.
It fits the Superman. It doesn't fit in with his character in the theatrical cut, because in Man of Steel, like again, the world is at stake here. And you could make this argument where he's going back and he's demolishing buildings to stop Zod, because he knows if he doesn't stop Zod, the whole planet is crushed. Like the whole planet is changed. It's done.
This is one of the things, and I think they touch on this I think you talked about in Captain America Civil War, switching universes here. But they touch on this idea of, sometimes you have to make sacrifices to, for the larger or greater good. Right, so like,
which was the big message of Man of Steel, where Clark's father, Kevin Costner, sacrifices himself for the greater good. Right, it's like, don't expose your identity here. We need you to stay this way so you can,
until the world is ready for you. Yeah. A lot of things didn't make sense in that theatrical cut, and this is the thing too, is like watching the theatrical, because I watched the theatrical cut in preparation for the Snyder cuts 2 days apart, and the ranking for Justice League, it went down for me just because of that comparison too, to seeing how good the Snyder cut actually was, and to seeing things like you mentioned. I think it's become a lot more obvious now with the allegations against Joss Whedon. We won't go into it here, but issues of harassment and abuse, specifically in relation to gender and race as well. I don't want to get into any allegations here. You can read all about it from actual first sources who know what they're talking about. But in terms of, you mentioned that scene where the Flash falls down and he on top of Wonder Woman at one point in a fight with his face in between her breasts. Which is a gag that Joss Whedon put in, not just that movie, but also Avengers Age of Ultron with Bruce Banner and Black Widow. The first fight with Ultron, he falls down on top of her with his face in between her breasts. This weird, which is a weird kind of gag
This is not a director trademark that should be encouraged.
No, and it just like from what I've read about behind the scenes reports, both Gal Gadot and her stunt woman felt really uncomfortable with this scene because it was completely out of place, completely out of context, and from what I've heard, again, third, fourth-hand knowledge, that her stunt double actually was the one who did that scene, and she was potentially, allegedly threatened. Like her job was threatened to do that. But it was like a little juvenile adolescent thing where like the man falls on top of a woman, and just like this weird kind of sexualization kind of deal. It felt kind of off in both movies. I was glad to see that was removed. There was like this weird animosity between in the theatrical version between Bruce Wayne and Diana Prince, where they're arguing about whether to try and resurrect Superman who died in the previous movie, and he starts like going off on Diana, like, where have you been? It's like, what about Steve Trevor? And like taunting her, and she like pushes him and attacks him, and like all that stuff is gone. Like this time when when they get the mother box, because Cyborg's father had the mother box, so he goes and gets it, and they just like they're standing around that same scene, but Zack Snyder's version in the Zack Snyder cut, and literally the first thing that comes up is like Flash is like, oh yeah, we should, like, you guys are all thinking the same thing, right? Like we need to bring him back, and there's some misgivings among people, but overall they kind of agree. There's no big contrived fight between Wonder Woman and Batman. They're just all like, they're like, you know, like it's a calculated risk to bring him back because we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. But we have to take that chance for the sake of the planet. And they're all kind of in agreement, right? There wasn't a big fight.
They know the risks, right? But they know that, this is something that they have to explore. I just want to touch on a thing I was a little bit disappointed with in this movie. I thought maybe we are going to get more Lois Lane, more Amy Adams in this entry, and especially in reference to bringing Superman back, where this one really played out very similarly to the theatrical cut, where Lois just so happened to be nearby when they were doing all this. I had the impression in the theatrical cut that Bruce had reached out to Lois, had her nearby, but the Zack Snyder's cut here basically confirms that no, none of that happened. That no one reached out to Lois, she was just literally walking down the street.
It was a little convenient, but I think it played out better than the theatrical cut.
For sure.
Because the theatrical cut, Bruce Wayne / Batman kept talking about, we have to bring out the big guns. And everybody kept thinking, I was like, he's got a secret weapon he's going to use against them. And it turned out to be, no, he was apparently in contact with Lois Lane, which there was no hint at. Like those two characters had no interaction. There was no hint that he was in touch with her at all. Just like, we're going to have her show up because Bruce Wayne said so. Yeah. Which also felt kind of weird. It's like Lois Lane is just like on command. She's just at the beck and call of Bruce Wayne whenever he wants her to be somewhere. It felt kind of weird. So this one, at least it made sense in the context of the movie, where she was going to that shrine every day, that monument to Superman, and then it made sense kind of that there was the connective tissue where Superman, as soon as he woke up, as soon as he was resurrected, he went to that place that had special meaning for both of them. So it kind of made sense. Obviously, that's a really good point. It was a very comic book movie plot point,
which is fine,
but it made sense that they were both had that emotional connection to that place, and it kind of made sense that they were there at the same time.
I think you just set a light bulb off in my head that maybe reduces my criticism for the convenience of Lois Lane just walking by. It also leads into another complaint I had that maybe is not as much of a complaint anymore, wherein we discover Clark's mother, Martha, is talking to Lois and basically kind of encouraging her to get back out there because Lois is at an absolute low. And so through that conversation, Lois, I think decides, yes, I'm going to continue going to that memorial site, right? And it turns out that was the Martian Manhunter disguised as Martha Kent, which in the moment I was like, oh man, that was kind of sad. I would really prefer that was the real Martha getting that out there. But now in this context, I kind of understand better. Martian Manhunter knew this was going on. He's kind of operating in the shadows. He knows Lois needs to go back out there, right? He needs to keep this tradition going, and essentially plays his part in making sure the Superman Returns goes well.
Well, I think, yeah, it sheds new light on that scene. I think she was going to that monument literally for the last time. Like, she was saying, kind of like saying her goodbye. Like, she was moving on with the grieving process and saying, you know, like, I have to say goodbye to this person I lost and move on. But you're right. The Martian Manhunter was the one who got her to go out there that one last time and say goodbye. So she just happened to be there. But that was kind of, and I was kind of torn about that whole scene too. It was a lot better than the newsroom scene in the theatrical release, where they had it was weird pacing and some weird jokes. But yeah, it was a nice scene between the two characters, but it did feel a little bit undermined by having one of them be the Martian Manhunter. I'm torn. It was still a touching scene, and like you said, I'm never gonna argue if you're gonna add more Amy Adams to a movie. It's never gonna be a bad thing.
Without a doubt, yeah. And really, a lot of the afterward stuff where Lois and Clark are together was nice. I don't think was that much different from the theatrical cut.
I think one of the things that was really different in the Snyder cut from the theatrical, maybe not really different because there was a couple subtle little shots in there, just implying that Lois Lane was pregnant.
Oh,
because
okay.
she opens up the drawer.
Yes.
And there's
the
pregnancy test.
Yes.
And then at the end, I think one of them was carrying a baby basket instead of, I think in the original, in the theatrical release, it was like a box full of stuff. But in the Zack Snyder version, I think it's Lois Lane. If you look closely, she's carrying like a baby basket or like a part of a crib into the house, implying that she's pregnant with Superman's son. So again, just that little narrative hints in there that could have led to something great in the DCU, because I know there's a lot of storylines about various children of Superman.
This is the issue: is that there's a lot of stuff in the movie that makes me sad. I talked to others, and it's kind of the same thing. We're all sad because the Martian Manhunter thing may not go anywhere. Superman's son or daughter may not go anywhere. There's a lot of plot lines that kind of happen in his version, in Zack Snyder's version, that seems to be, well, Warner's is going to treat the theatrical cut as the canon version.
Is that what they said?
But that being said, this is Warner Brothers handling the DC universe. It could change at any moment, right? It would not surprise me if they continued on with some of the stuff that went on in Zack Snyder's Justice League. At the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if they just abandoned all that stuff anyways.
I think continuity in the DC EU as it currently stands is a completely lost cause. Like, if they want to do something, they need to start with their multiverse and kind of start from scratch.
I think that's kind of why Shazam and Wonder Woman kind of work for me, because they don't really have very much bearing on the rest of the DC universe. I mean, Shazam possibly, but it felt pretty self-contained. And Wonder Woman, as kind of a prequel in time, it could stand on its own.
So yeah, so the Snyder version of, or the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League, I think it's officially referred to as the title Zack Snyder's Justice League, to help differentiate it on sites like Letterboxd. But I feel like overall, like, all the characters were a lot more like consistent throughout the whole thing. Obviously, the CGI was a lot better. Like, CGI characters like Steppenwolf and Darkseid, who wasn't even in the original theatrical release, they looked.
I want to talk
really
about
good.
Steppenwolf for a minute there.
Okay.
The dude looked impressive.
Yeah, he looked formidable, and he looked alien. Like, you look at it.
He did.
I was staring at his hands the whole time because it looked like he had like 3 thumbs. He had like 8 fingers.
This is almost cheating. This morning I watched the Corridor crew react to digital effects. They did Zack Snyder's Justice League, and
I
you
saw
just
that
watched it
yesterday.
as well.
Yeah.
And in Batman v Superman, we catch a glimpse of Steppenwolf, and he looks like he does in Zack Snyder's Justice League. So that means that they saw what he looked like in Batman v Superman, and then changed him drastically. And the change in the theatrical is not that great. I mean, he's just a villain. But in Zack Snyder's Justice League, there's so many visually interesting things going on with him. His suit, it's moving these little metallic spikes moving about. Everything about was interesting. And I just want to throw out that final fight scene with Superman and Steppenwolf. I mean, Steppenwolf is kicking everyone's butt. And Superman comes in, it just lays a smackdown, but he gets vicious. And I'm glad that we got numerous more scenes with Steppenwolf talking to Darkseid, because at some point he takes off his helmet and you see, these giant horns coming off of his head are part of his body.
Yeah.
And Superman in the final battle, ruthless, black-suited Superman, just lasers one of these horns off his body. It's just like, oh my God, Superman.
Oh yeah, like even like in the theatrical cut when Superman shows up, that is, like there's still an extended fight scene with Steppenwolf where like him, Superman, Aquaman, and Wonder Woman are still fighting, all three of them with Steppenwolf for some time. And then I think in that one they a thread which is completely dropped, thankfully, in the new version, which is that the parademons are attracted to fear. Almost like moths. So like he starts to get afraid at the end, and his own parademons turn against him, and it's just such a stupid plot thread now in retrospect. But like in this one, Aquaman and Wonder Woman, they're holding their own against Steppenwolf, but they're not in danger of taking him down. But Superman shows up, and he just like he lays waste to this guy. He's like there's no question about it. Yeah, when he's like Steppenwolf is kind of flailing around, he's kind of fighting back, but you can tell like Superman has the best when he's hitting them, and those like shockwaves are emanating out. Yeah, like almost like his cries at the beginning of the movie where it's showing his death again, and he's just like laying into the guy, and like you said, he lasers his horn off, and it's just so brutal, and it's like there's no question. It's like, yeah, you come to, like, we're not playing a game here. You came to destroy our planet. Like, I'm gonna stop you. Like, I'm gonna bring up full force against you and stop you. Like, there's no, I'm not leaving to save a single building full of civilians. I'm gonna, stop this at the source. And it was like, yeah, there was a no nonsense tone to that fight, which was, I mean, as it should be considering the stakes.
Yeah, and I like that they set it up more so in this film, where all these aliens, like whatever Steppenwolf is, and including Darkseid, they're not messing with Earth because they know there's a dude from Krypton. What am I supposed to call him? A kryptonite? No.
Kryptonian?
A Kryptonian, yes. They know there's a dude. They know there's a Kryptonian on Earth, and they're not going to mess with Earth while that's going on, right? And we actually get treated to a pretty fancy battle scene that takes place thousands and thousands of years in the past, when they tried to take over Earth at one point. Darkseid shows up, and there's a whole bunch of ancient gods. I think you literally have Zeus on the battlefield. You have Wonder Woman's mother on there as well. You've got all these Amazonians. You've got the Aquaman folks.
Atlanteans.
Atlanteans. Yes,
also,
thank you.
In a nice nod to Wonder Woman, they actually have Ares, who was the bad guy in Wonder Woman, and he's actually fighting alongside everybody at that time.
Which is wild. Yeah. It's a visual feast, and there's lots of little, I think, fun Easter eggs in there, including the Green Lantern, who gets his hand completely chopped off, which is fine. But all these alien races are afraid of Green Lanterns, and they're afraid of Kryptonians. And then moving backwards in time here to the very beginning of the film, I like that Batman v Superman just goes right into Justice League here. The Justice League picks up at Superman's death, and he just lets out the mightiest yell the Earth has ever seen. It resonates throughout the entire world. It's what wakes up the mother boxes in the first place, but also kind of notifies everyone else that the Kryptonian is dead. And that means Steppenwolf, paying attention to all this, he comes down and he's like, great, no Kryptonian in my way. Fantastic, let's do this. And they have a fighting chance. And when it, go towards the end, the Kryptonian's back. Oh man, we are cooked, I just love seeing that power.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing too. The narrative structure of the whole movie changed. I think in the theatrical release, it starts off with that weird video from the kids of of that terribly CGI'd Henry Cavill as Superman interviewing for their podcast. A bunch of geeks.
Yeah, that was really messy.
And then this one starts off exactly. It felt like it was cohesive part of the other movies, right? Where it starts off literally where Batman v Superman ended with Superman's death and showing the consequences of that, and showing, visually how his death was literally kind of heard and felt around the world.
Yeah.
Where like figuratively it was felt, obviously, from the loss of this hero who literally saved the world, but also like kind of where his battle cry is going out almost like sonic waves. His battle cry, his death cry is going out like sonic waves, and like you say, hits the mother boxes, and that just like, it's almost like it's like that slight little vibration where you hit that like little like triangle, and it's like all of a sudden it's like you can just picture Steppenwolf like looking up. It's like, oh, it's like they must have like computer screens or something, and it's all of a sudden it's like they get this one like wave. It's like, oh, the Kryptonian died.
Yeah,
which must mean also that in this universe there must be other Kryptonians who survived the destruction of planet Krypton, because they refer to they know his power specifically derived from our yellow sun, but that must have happened to some other people as well, or is he the only one? I don't know.
Well, I'm thinking in Man of Steel, there's there's the trio of Kryptonians that were stuck in the Phantom Zone, that were busted out. It's pretty safe to say that Krypton has been sending a lot of criminals to the Phantom Zone, and there'd be a lot of Kryptonians being able to escape at some point. I'm sure there's all sorts of comic book story mechanics that would allow more Kryptonians to come out.
You gotta hope that there's at least a couple Kryptonian equivalents to Nelson Mandela in there who get out, so they're not all bad guys.
Exactly. Well, I mean, we should have Supergirl show up at some point, right?
Ooh.
My only knowledge of Supergirl was in the Smallville series, where she was also sent off planet, but through whatever time distortion, she arrived like 15 years before Clark did. I don't know exactly what went on, but that sounds like it's ripe for more movie stuff.
But also, like, one of the other opening scenes was Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, going to track down Arthur Curry, aka Aquaman, and that whole scene, like in the theatrical cut, it's literally just like a 5-second scene where he just like shows up and he starts talking to these guys. But like in the Zack Snyder cut, you get that. This is where I talk about like that epic feeling where he's traveling across these mountains, and you get these beautiful shots, beautiful wide shots of like this beautiful landscape, these mountains and this rugged terrain, where you get the sense that Bruce Wayne had to travel a long way, and it was really difficult to get there. And I think somebody at one point when he meets with the villagers as he's tracking down Aquaman, somebody even mentions, is like, one of the villagers speaks up and says, like, how the heck did this guy get across the mountains? Like, because he said he came across the mountains. And people are like, that's impossible. You can't survive that. Like, nobody can cross those mountains. And just like, just the, like little nods to that. It's like, that's why he's Batman, right? Like, Batman is still awesome.
So, speaking of grand vistas and landscapes, what did you think of the aspect ratio?
Honestly, I thought it was. I didn't even notice it when I started watching it and got into it. But one thing I will say is, after watching, like you said, I think we both watched the Corridor Crew visual effects breakdown of the Snyder Cut, and one of their guests there, I can't remember his name, I apologize, he does I think his podcast is like Dungeons and Daddies, I think, where he has like a Dungeons and Dragons themed podcast. But he mentions that one of the things he doesn't like about the widescreen aspect ratio, which is kind of what we think of as the default aspect ratio now, is that for superhero movies, like, they don't really fill the frame, and it feels like it doesn't feel like they're as grand or as big a figure as they could be. But when you have that kind of more 4:3 or kind of more standard letterbox frame, like, the superheroes, they fill the frame. They feel larger than life, right?
They feel more accurate because that portrait style is the comic book layout.
Yeah.
Comic books are more vertical than they are horizontal, and so we have 70 plus years of heroes in that format. So when you throw it into the 4:3 aspect ratio here, and actually utilize that extra height, you're almost better able to emulate those panels and really give those characters room to breathe.
Well, if you look at a lot of the action, where especially you have characters that can fly, all of a sudden the action gets a lot more vertical than it is horizontal, right? So you see, like, all of a sudden when you see Superman taking off, you get a lot more of that shot, right? You don't have to you don't have to pan the camera crazy. You can see that all. And so maybe that's not something I really noticed watching through, but maybe they were able to articulate one of the reasons why subconsciously that this film felt more epic when I was watching it. It felt more grand in scale. Maybe that subtle psychological thing that was going on.
For sure.
Right?
Like, as he said in that video, when you have a wide screen, you kind of end up shrinking the size of your characters, where this 4:3 aspect ratio is more square and it's more vertical. You get to see more of your characters. And I think that was really to the benefit of Zack Snyder's treatment of his characters. And I don't know if we talked about this before. He treats his characters like the gods that they are. And this is a major difference between the Marvel universe and the DC universe and even the comic books. Superman is a god and Wonder Woman is a god. Green Lantern, they all have these godly powers. The Flash is the god of time and speed and everything. Not only in this aspect ratio, but in this version of Justice League, these characters really get to showcase their extreme powers. And it doesn't feel like they're being held back for any particular reason. Like, sometimes you have these characters hold back their powers just to better serve a plot line. Like, if you're watching the Flash TV series, or going back to Smallville, where we don't want Clark to fly around because it's too powerful. It costs too much money to have him fly, right? So he's going to be a speedster, basically. In Smallville, he's a speedster more than anything else. And here, he's obviously afforded the budget, but man, these characters can do what they've been doing in comics and just go wild. And it is very satisfying to see that play out on screen, because at the end of the day, and even in those CW shows, I'm watching those shows because of those moments where they showcase those powers. And now we have a full movie where they're showcasing those powers without compromise. And I think that's really effective towards enjoying this movie.
I think this too speaks to the power of the medium, right? Where in a TV show, it still feels small, even though you have like TV shows now like Flash and Supergirl, where you can tell like some of the special effects in the Flash TV show. I've been watching it with my son. Like, there's some like top tier like special effects in some of those shows. Sometimes
they do a good job with what they got.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little wonky, obviously TV budget, but some of those special effects, they would have felt right at home in like movies 20 years ago, right? Like, they would have blown them out of the water. But something still feels off with those characters. Like in a movie, when you have that specific kind of style of filmmaking and you have that budget, but you get that real sense of epicness, that real epic sense of these characters that you just can't get in a TV show, I think. Justice League really captured that sense of scale. It was incredibly way more coherent than the theatrical release in terms of not just visual style, visual aesthetic, but in terms of the narrative, in terms of things just like making sense narratively, and you can see why, because it was chopped up to that extent. The characters all behave. They're all consistent in terms of their behavior, in terms of their arcs that they go through. Obviously, you have Wonder Woman and Batman and Superman. Obviously, had their own movies before this one to build them up a little bit, to give them a bit more backstory. But even like we were saying, like Aquaman, we haven't talked a whole lot about, but he was given good character, good backstory, good motivation.
They expanded on him a little bit, and I thought it was pretty appropriate. It's one of those things too where, sorry to interrupt, we're in this weird situation where we know all about Aquaman now because this movie came out between the theatrical and this cut. So it's like, how much more do we need to delve into this, and how much do they pander to that in this cut? Like when Snyder is putting together this cut of the film, he knows everyone has seen Aquaman. So what does he do with Aquaman? Does that change his approach to Aquaman here? And I don't really feel like he compromised that much.
Yeah, Willem Dafoe shows up in this.
Is it Mara?
Mara? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Her fight scene. So all the other stuff going on with Amber Heard, obviously, is, I think she's out of the DCU right now.
Yeah.
But like her fight scene with Steppenwolf under the water, when she starts like sucking the water and the blood out of him, showing her true extent of her power,
again shows, hey, these characters have real power, and yeah, they would do something crazy like that. Like, they're not messing around.
So like overall, I think 100% of Zack Snyder's Justice League was better than the 2017 theatrical release. It was just a better movie in every way.
Very much, yeah.
I had a couple small nitpicks for Zack
Let's hear
Snyder's
'em.
Justice League. So, mostly in the epilogue chapter, it was broken up, I think, into 7 chapters, 6 or 7. I
It was 7 chapters, yeah.
7 chapters. So the epilogue, I think it suffered a little bit from Return of the King syndrome,
Yeah.
where they had nice epilogues for the main characters there, where you had, like, I think, Cyborg finally listens to the tape that his father left him,
Mm-hmm.
and Aquaman goes back to the ocean, and I can't remember what happens with the others, but it shows kind of like a nice little closures, like they're going, oh yeah, like Batman and Superman are back on the farm, like Batman got their house back for them. Nice little closing, and then there's a couple other scenes that really felt like they should have been like mid-credit scenes or end-credit scenes. There's 3 scenes that really felt like they were kind of tacked on, and some of them were filmed after the fact when Zack Snyder was redoing or restoring his initial version. So there's one with Deathstroke, aka Slade Wilson.
Yep.
He learns from Lex Luthor, who's escaped from prison, that Batman's real name is Bruce Wayne. That's a whole little scene, kind of Easter egg nuggets setting up what was originally going to be a solo Batman movie with Ben Affleck's Batman fighting Deathstroke, which is not going to happen now. There's a second scene, another nightmare scene, where it's Bruce Wayne having this dream about a terrible future where Darkseid has taken over Earth and Superman has turned evil because of the death of Lois Lane, which is hinted at why Lois Lane is so important, just to kind of help kind of keep Superman in check. And that feels like it's kind of, it's a mid-credits or end-credits stinger
For
teaser,
sure.
right? And then there's a final one, which was, you can really tell was shot after the fact, because Ben Affleck, he's obviously not as bulky as he was when he was playing Batman, but he wakes up from his nightmare dream, and this figure comes down from the sky. And at first I thought it was, oh, this is Superman. They're going to have like a little kind of connection about, like, you know, thank you for bringing me back kind of thing.
A little bro moment.
But it was turned out to be Martian Manhunter.
Yeah.
And they had this like weird little exposition scene or kind of meeting scene, which really felt like it would be like a mid-credits scene setting up a future Justice League Part 2 movie.
Mm-hmm.
Those 3 scenes really felt kind of, they were neat little Easter eggs, but they felt like they should have been like, they were mid-credit scenes. Everything up to that point, great. And then those 3 scenes kind of,
100%. I'll tell you, I was rolling my eyes during those scenes. They 100% belonged in a post-credits or mid-credits, like you said. They are some of the only scenes where he shot new footage. And like Ben Affleck and Jared Leto in a scene together were never actually in the same room performing that scene.
Okay,
it was all just kind of pieced together afterwards. You know what? Now that you say that, I'm not sure if that's confirmed. That's just what I've seen online.
Okay, because I heard that online, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to...
Because they never share the frame together.
Okay, but they don't... Yeah, that's the thing. It's like people... I went back after the fact, and it's like, okay, they don't share the frame, really, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't together. I don't know. Like, it's entirely possible.
Basically, DeMevo's scenes felt a little self-indulgent, and...
Yeah.
I don't know. At that point in time, I could have had the movie end 20 minutes earlier than it did without those epilogue and would have been just as happy with the film. At the end, those scenes don't really take away from my enjoyment of the film.
No.
But if I'm rewatching the movie, there's a chance I might just skip the epilogue. Is that sacrilegious to say?
I might skip those portions of the epilogue, because there's a couple scenes in there with the Justice League kind of doing their thing, and it shows them going off. Like Aquaman's going off to film his Aquaman movie, and all the other, and Wonder Woman's going off to film her sequel movie, and Bruce Wayne's going off to retire from the DCU. But like that stuff is okay, but it's those 3 extra scenes that really felt like, because like the rest of the movie, I love how like the shot he really, like, Zack Snyder really allows time to, he like lingers on these shots, right?
Mm-hmm.
He gives these shots the time to breathe. And that contributes to the epicness as well, where it felt almost luxurious. Like the shots felt luxurious watching them, where it's like they were stretched out and there's long, beautiful shots of these amazing landscapes or these people doing these amazing things. And those ones, I think, those last 3 scenes kind of felt a little bit, I don't want to say self-indulgent, but they felt kind of, you could feel they felt tacked on, right? They felt extraneous, maybe, which is why I felt like if you move those scenes, honestly, if you move those scenes into the credits, at the end of the credits, no problem at all, right? That's fine. Like, end it after your heroes like save the day and then they go their own separate ways, but ready to be called on again to Bruce's round table in his in his mansion, which is opening back up again. Like little things like that where it's
which is
it was in the theatrical cut as well, but like in the movie itself, in the new one too, it's showing like where he had kind of abandoned his family home because of all the memories and just showing his disconnection from humanity. So going back to that place and it's like I have like it's like he's found a new family, he's refound his humanity. So little touches like that.
Well, for Bruce, his arc is over the course of 2 movies.
Yeah,
because you could really watch Batman v Superman and this one back to back and have essentially a 6.5 hour film that is one coherent piece. It slides perfectly together, and for Bruce's character it's almost important that you do watch Batman v Superman, probably even the ultimate cut, to get the full effect of it.
It really feels like, I mean, and again, full disclosure, like I am a huge fan of Zack Snyder and all his work. 300 is still one of my top movies of all time. I'd still slot it in my top 10. So like I'm coming at this with a certain point of view and a very obvious bias. I'm a fan of Zack Snyder as a filmmaker, but you know, within that context though, just to give you that background, this movie just felt so epic. Like it felt like, it was very. I was blown away. It was
extremely satisfying, and I think we touched on a lot of it. I was really impressed with the film. I will definitely revisit this version of Justice League and basically never watch that other theatrical cut ever again. You know what this is? So this is going to become a trope of this podcast, is that after we talk about a movie, I am pumped about the film and I'm thinking, oh, this should rank higher than I originally gave it. I had Zack Snyder's Justice League at 3.5 stars. And for comparison, the lowest my Justice League theatrical cut rating went was 2 stars. This is easily twice or even more the film than that theatrical cut was. I don't think it fully deserves the 4.5, but honestly, after talking about it and after revisiting it, this is going to be a 4-star film for me.
Yeah, see, for me, I have, I think on Letterboxd right now, Zack Snyder's Justice League, I have it ranked at 4 out of 5 stars.
Yep.
I was oh, you've been stalking me on Letterboxd?
I checked it out.
I was teetering between 4 and 4.5. It's not a perfect film, but I can't remember the last time I got that sense of kind of epic scale in that specific way, because I remember it wasn't that long ago, but I watched Tenet for the first time, and like Christopher Nolan knows how to make a film. He knows how to give that sense of scale and that sense of epicness. I know I've said the word epic like a million times in this episode, but like there's different kinds of that sense of scale where, for me, Zack Snyder's Justice League felt more on the scale of like Lord of the Rings, where like you had that like epic journey, and like the landscape was epic, the heroes were larger than life. Mm-hmm. Everything felt like you had that emotional connection to everything. It felt like the world building was in place, where all the dialogue and the narrative, it felt like you were on this grand adventure with these characters. Just a few stumbles. I think people were making this point online too, where even though I liked how some of these shots were like lingering and very luxurious and like it's like give you time to like take in what was happening, I think he could have trimmed this down to like maybe 3.5 hours, just taking out like little bits here and there. And I think it would have been like, obviously those 3 scenes at the end, put them with the end credits, but like it's like I like how luxurious the shots felt, but I think he could have tightened up a little bit more. But this is just me as a layperson, as a fan of film who's never edited a film before, just giving my kind of general thoughts as a moviegoer, right? So like
I'm watching the movie and I'm thinking, oh, these 4 seconds could be cut here or there. I'm not really going into that much detail, but I'm sure there's lots of little moments that could be trimmed down.
Not but like tightened. Yeah. But I still want, like, I'm still thinking, like, I've still got burned in my brain, like when Batman / Bruce Wayne is crossing those mountains, and it's just like just that feeling of scale there. I was like, I don't want that cut down a whole lot.
Yeah.
Right, just like a few seconds in a couple scenes here and there, and you'd save a bit of time, and you could. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't. Obviously, it's fine the way it's perfectly fine. Not fine. That's not a ringing endorsement. It's great. It's great the way it is.
It is great. Yeah. It's interesting you brought up Christopher Nolan, and I'm thinking, what other directors than Zack Snyder and Christopher Nolan working with Warner Brothers does the studio give so much control over? Because this is unprecedented in the movie industry, isn't it? Where, to give you some financial numbers here, and these are probably not entirely confirmed, the theatrical cut of Justice League grossed about $600 million worldwide and was deemed a disappointment. It was expected this was going to be a $1 billion film. Initially, Warner's was giving Zack Snyder about $20 to $30 million for him to make his cut of the film, and that quickly ballooned up to about $70 million at last report. And you think, okay, that's $70 million with pre-existing footage. He only filmed about 3 or 4 minutes worth of footage for this movie. And that was, you could see it all in the epilogue. All of it was in visual effects and editing and all the stuff, like essentially finishing a movie after the wrap. And the only reason this was done is to drive business over to the HBO Max streaming service. And I think I read an article where they're interviewing Deborah Snyder saying, yeah, if it wasn't for HBO Max, this project would never have happened. This was a tentpole for that streaming platform. What a crazy world we're in now, where, you can, I think the film cost about $250-300 million to produce initially. Yeah. Add in another $70 million on top of that to recut it. What a crazy world. That just tells you how much money is involved in these streaming services and almost going beyond the box office. And I think Warner's, they're a business. They know people are getting their service. They know people would go out to theaters if that was an option. They know people like Zack Snyder movies. It's wild. And I'm pretty happy that we got this. I wasn't fully on board. I could take it or leave it when we're heading into the release the Snyder Cut movement. But I was always intrigued. I'm always going to be intrigued by director's cuts, alternate cuts. Throughout history, there's always been multiple cuts of films, but nothing to this degree. This is maybe once in a lifetime situation of being able to revisit a film and it being an entirely different movie.
But overall, yeah, if you have the chance to go see the Zack Snyder's Justice League, do yourself a favor. If you're already a fan of the DC universe or the DCEU, you're probably all over this already. And I know, like, the fan reaction, I think it's the general consensus is that this is just a much better version of the film. But for, fans of the comic books and fans of this movie universe, I think it's a real treat.
And that wraps up the 4th episode of the Reel Film Chronicles podcast. We really do appreciate you listening, and thank you for hanging out with us this week. If you'd like to reach out to us, any comments or suggestions for films to cover, you can email us at reelfilmchronicles@outlook.com, and be sure to check out our website at reelfilmchronicles.com. Until next time, stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you soon.